hitting that. So
Can you let the secretary know that Alicia is also here for the attendance records?
Yes.
Thanks.
Is that on the 334 number?
No, same connection as Aaron.
Okay, thank you very much. And who is on the area code 334 number?
Richard Fast.
Okay, thank you. I'll change that here so it shows up as you. And for the recording, I'll say again that we had called the meeting to order at 7:06. Did you take a formal roll call yet, Omar? Is that what that is, or is that your informal?
That's informal, just seeing everybody just start to pop on.
Okay, if you could take a formal roll call before we begin with anything else.
Yeah, I'm just waiting on you.
Yep, we're called to order, so.
Alrighty. The proverbial gavel has been hit. All right, here we go. Matt Chokel.
I'm here.
Laura Epke.
I'm here.
Richard Fast.
Here.
Jim Fulner.
Jim Fulner will not be in attendance. He's Jeff Wood, his first alternate.
Okay, I'm going to note that. Helen Gilson.
Ms. Gilson is not going to be in attendance tonight, first alternate. Cavoli is, however, for Ohio.
Excellent. Paul Grendel.
Present.
Okay. Duke Van Horn.
Present.
Thomas Knapp.
Present.
Kat Martin.
Present.
Josh McHose.
Present.
Randy McGlenn. Nessa McGlenn. Not hearing nothing. Al Meckley.
Present.
Okay. Madam Chair said Mr. Morris would be late, so I'm marking him as absent at the moment. Daryl Perry.
Present.
Omar Curl is present. Roger Roots. Mr. Roots from Montana. Ryan Slewinski. I remember he was late last time. He might be late again. Aaron Starr.
Present, as is also Alicia Matson.
Curry Taylor. Oh, he's absent. And Karen Ann Harlos. Present. Okay. Madam Chair, you want me to do the alternates, right?
Yes, even the alternates that aren't sitting as primaries, yes, so we could have that for the record.
Yes. So Jeffrey Adams from Texas. Okay, I have Mr. Cavoli. Fred Cole, New York. Spencer Diaz. Tiffany Diaz de Leon. Richard Longstreth. I think he said he was not going to be here.
I'm here. I actually made it.
Oh, all right. Miss Matson is here. Betty Rose Ryan. Gus Talis. John Watts. Okay, Luke Enzer. I'm going to the second alternate now. Lisa Gaiola.
Here.
John Faulkner. Matthew Maxner. AJ Olding.
He's here, but his mic is on mute, but I saw he was doing a great workout.
Yeah, I noticed that too.
It was inspiring me to get out. I was going to start doing this too along with you.
Okay, Madam Chair, I show 13 primaries and 2 alternates, so that will bring quorum number to 15.
Okay, we now are entering into 10 minutes.
Richard Fast.
Oh yes, Richard Fast is also here, Mr. Mercurio.
Yeah, I have him. He's a primary.
Yes, he is. Okie doke. We're entering into 10 minutes for public comment. So if there are any members of the public that would like to comment on pretty much anything that's related to platform, of course, please just let yourself be known and I will recognize you. Mr. Suarez, were you seeking to be recognized?
No, I'm just listening.
Okay. I saw your little green thing come around and I was like, okay. Just going to give it a few moments in case some people are figuring out how to unmute. And if there's no public comment, we'll move on with our agenda.
Two-thirds would be.
Okay, it doesn't appear that we have any at this time. At the end, if there's any time remaining, we will again have an opportunity, and even after the meeting closes at 9, I usually ask committee members to hang around for any informal discussion that any party members may wish to have. At this time, I would ask that any guests please mute their microphones, and also committee members who are not speaking, if you could mute your microphones when you're not speaking, it helps keep the background noise down. So the first item on the agenda, but one thing I wanted to explain, you may notice on this agenda, other than opportunity for public comment, I had not put time limits on items. Mr. Brown had given me a call after our last meeting and expressed a concern that since in committees, time, like you're not allowed to do a motion to end debate. And it was his potential opinion that putting time limits on the agenda is kind of an end run around that. And I tended to agree with him. He is asking about this on the Roberts Forum, but my initial thought is that I agree with him. And even though that's the way things have been done in the past, I'm not so sure that's been correct. So I am not putting time limits on these items. If any member wishes to make a motion to amend the agenda to do so, they can. I'll let you know that I would say that I would believe it was out of order, but then you would have an opportunity to appeal. So before we got started on the agenda, I wanted to give any members any opportunity if they wish to make a motion to make any kind of time limits.
Point of information, this is Omar.
Yes.
Are you quoting any particular section of Roberts?
I can, but we had discussed this before when people had attempted to call the question. I can give you the specific reference later for your minutes if you would like. But
Yeah.
you're not allowed to move to end debate. And to me, adding time limits is effectively doing the same thing, just doing it via agenda. So I'm just giving anyone an opportunity to make that motion if they wish to.
My hand is raised.
Oh, I see Mr. Starr.
Actually, Alicia Matson would like to speak.
And I'm an alternate, so I need permission.
Without objection, Ms. Matson.
This is a subject that's come up, over several terms. We did discuss it last term, and my initial read on it was I had similar concerns to what Mr. Brown raised, but I have also attended a training conference at which Burke Balch pointed out that because of the other limitations on committees, you can't move to closed debate, that the only mechanism committees had to control their time was to set agenda time limits. And
Who Burke Balch is.
so Ms. Harlos will recognize the name, but Burke Balch, for the benefit of the rest of the committee, is a member of the authorship team of Robert's Rule. So
he signed my Roberts right here, so yes.
Yeah, I wish it were more explicitly clear in Roberts because, you know, there's not a page to go point to. And I had done it before on these committees just based on, you know, if Mr. Balch is comfortable with it, then fine, we'll do it. And it certainly makes the meetings more efficient. So just wanted to throw that in the hopper.
Thank you, Ms. Mattson. I would like to answer Mr. Knapp's question in chat. No, I do not believe that means anyone can prevent anything from ever coming to a vote, because the chair still has the opportunity, if things are just being repeated over and over again, to say things are now being dilatory. There are still other methods to keep one person or several people from keeping things from coming to a vote. So I don't believe that concern is well-founded. Mr. Starr, were you intending on making such a motion to add time limits?
I don't think I need to. If you want to try it this way for this meeting, go for it. I think that we'd be well served having them, but you know, give it a shot. See how you like it.
Okay, I just wanted to explain my reasoning in case anyone had noticed the difference. Mr. Secretary, please note that Randy McGlenn
Yes.
has joined us.
Yes, I see it in the chat. I'm noting it now.
Okay, so we will go
Updating.
on with the first item on the agenda, which was a motion, and for expediency's sake, I'm moving these motions because the chair can do so, but it did have enough interest in committee. But the motion was to add a new plank with a title and number to be determined if the plank passes, that would read as follows: we support self-determination for the territories of the United States. The federal government should accept the results of a referendum of each territory regarding preferences for statehood, independence, or to maintain their current status. For as long as the United States maintains territories, we support a constitutional amendment granting their full representation in the U.S. House of Representatives. I will not be speaking for this motion, but I am moving it. So I see Mr. Starr has his hand raised to speak.
Yeah, I have a problem with this because, candidly, I don't recognize the U.S. authority to have territories. I think that these territories should just simply be abandoned, maybe not the right word, but or at least maybe ceded back to the residents.
Madam Chair.
I don't think we have any
1 moment.
claim. I don't think we have any legitimate claim to territories. At least I've never found it in the Constitution.
Okay, and who was asking to be recognized?
Richard Fast.
Okay, Mr. Starr, are you concluded?
For now.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Fast?
I would like to move to amend the proposal to keep the first line and strike the rest of the proposal.
Okay. Well, we don't need seconds on committees, so that we have what you are, let me repeat it to make sure I understand, that you are wishing to keep, we support self-determination for the territories of the United States, and strike the rest of the proposal. So there would be a new plank with just that one sentence.
Correct. It could also, that one sentence could also be inserted in an existing plank where this body feels that's appropriate. But for right now, I'm only suggesting that we keep the first line and strike the rest.
Okay, so debate would now move on to the amendment, and I see Paul has his hand raised and Mr. Cavoli has his hand raised. Paul?
I think that the amendment to this motion is not a good amendment. I believe that given the current reality that these territories face, we should be very clear about what the party platform says we want these territories to be able to do, and especially what we want to be able to do in the confines of what is practically a realistic path for them to have their own self-determination and potentially even liberation. Removing the language that would explain what we support in terms of that process, I think that is not supporting them in the way that perhaps the proposer of this amendment believes it is.
Okay, I have up next Mr. Cavoli and then Mr. McGlynn and Mr. Perry on deck. Mr. Cavoli?
Are we worried about for and against order on this still, or are we
No.
just kind of going?
No, we're not. Just whoever gets their hands up first.
Well, I would just like to echo the sentiments that were just made. While I may support some degree of editing or reduction of certain text in this proposal, I think this goes at least a sentence too far. I think it's critical, especially for other debates that this body has had about reducing planks to where they're almost useless rehashings of the statement of principle rather than meaningful applications and policy suggestions for the present world, that we seriously ought to vote down this amendment.
Okay, and Mr. Secretary, if you would note that Mr. Morris has arrived. I have now Mr. McGlynn with Mr. Perry on deck. Mr. McGlynn.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I am also in opposition of this this item. Actually, let me backstep since we're speaking on the amendment now. I could support the plank as it's been amended, although I think it may be lost in interpretation based on how short it is. There might need to be some additional language to support that. If I may be allowed, just to speak on the original item and why I'm supporting this, would be supportive of this amendment at least.
That would be out of, well,
thank you.
Yeah, I'll put you on deck though for when we get back to the
it.
original.
Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Perry and then Mr. Knapp.
Yeah, so I'll speak in favor of this, and I'll actually say that I think that we should add this, whether the amended version here or the plank is introduced and possibly amended, we should put in 3.7, which is self-determination, where we're already talking about the right to alter or abolish other forms of government. I think that self-determination for territories, should they exist, should be in that self-determination plank.
What I would suggest, Mr. Perry, is if some version of this passes, when we get to the related motions of what to title it and where to put it, that a motion to that extent would be very appropriate at that time. Okay, Mr. Knapp.
Yeah, I have some problems with either version of the plank on Dallas Accord grounds. I don't support self-determination for governments. I support self-determination for individuals, and I don't see why we should be in favor of referenda allowing citizens of territories to drag everybody else with them in one direction or the other.
Okay, thank you. Is there anyone else who would like to speak on the amendment, or are we ready for vote on the amendment?
This is Jeff Wood. I'd like to speak.
Okay, I have Mr. Wood and then Mr. Grindle. Mr. Wood?
I support the amendment also on Dallas Accord grounds because I think supporting a constitutional amendment implies legitimacy for the Constitution.
Mr. Grindle?
I don't think that the amendment, even in its original form, is a Dallas Accord violation. It's not. This amendment does not say that the system in place is just or legitimate. It merely says that we support the concept that people can work within this system to do this specific thing, and that doesn't push the status of these territories in a more libertarian direction. I think it's totally wrong to see this amendment as accepting the legitimacy of the institutions it's trying to work with. It's just merely saying this is what we support doing within those institutions.
Thank you. I have Mr. McHose and then Mr. Knapp. Mr. McHose.
I was just going to add that I have the U.S. Constitution in front of me. Congress does have the authority to, where is it saying?
Is this on the amendments, Mr. McHose?
Yes.
Oh,
it is
okay.
specifically on, people are discussing on whether or not territories have the right to self-determination.
Okay, thank
and
you.
whether or not. So it's saying we would say if a territory were to want to join the Union of the United States, they would have the right to do so, and would be supporting their right to then leave the Union as well if they wanted to.
Okay, Mr. Knapp. I'm sorry. Continue,
Okay.
Mr. Okay, Mr. Knapp, I see you took your hand down. Did you still wish to speak?
No, I left my hand up accidentally.
Okay. Is there any further debate required on this amendment, or can we move to a vote on the amendment? Okay, seeing no hands raised, Mr. Secretary, if you could do a roll call vote on the amendment. And once again, let me state what the question is. The amendment is to retain only the language "we support self-determination for the territories of the United States," and to strike the rest. Voting for the amendment does not vote for us to adopt this proposal. It simply makes that the main motion, to be clear. Mr. Secretary, whenever you're ready.
Okay. Matt Choco?
Pass.
Okay. Laura Epke?
No.
Here we go. And Richard Fass?
Yes.
Jeff Wood?
Aye.
Jim Cavoli?
Nay.
Paul Grendel?
Nay.
Duke Van Horn?
No.
Thomas Knapp?
No.
Cat Martin?
No.
Josh McHose?
No.
Randy McGlenn?
Aye.
Al Meckley?
No.
Bennett Morris?
No.
Darryl Perry?
Yes.
Omar Okoro votes no. Roger Root's not here. Brian Swinsky not here. Aaron Starr?
No.
Okay, Mr. Taylor is not here. You will not be voting, Madam Chair. I show 5 to 10.
There was a pass.
Oh, yes, Mr. Choco.
Mr. Starr's vote was incorrectly tallied.
I voted
You're right.
no.
You're right. I'm sorry. I'm going too fast.
Matt Chalco, I put me down for abstain.
Okay. 4-11-1.
Okay, so that does not pass. We are back to the main motion as originally stated, and I have on deck Mr. McGlenn. I would add myself just for a brief comment after Mr. McGlenn. Then we have Mr. Starr. Mr. McGlenn.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My concern with this language is regarding the portion of, as long as the United States maintains territories, we support constitutional amendment granting their full representation in the U.S. House of Representatives. I think there's a lot of constitutional challenges to this. I also think that there's an issue around the process in differentiating between actual states and territories. I don't think that there would be any realistic momentum of realizing this type of a goal. Not to say that it's not aspirational that we would see something like that, but I think that we need to allow the constitutional process and the process for which we enter a new territories into the states should be maintained. And I think that this just tends to fly in the face of that. So I would support the statement regarding the self-determination, and that we support territories being able to choose whether or not they wish to stay as is, or to leave, or become a state. So in which case I would even move to strike simply the last sentence, for as long as the United States maintains territories, we support a constitutional amendment granting their full representation in the U.S. House of Representatives.
Are you making that motion?
Yes, Madam Chair.
Okay, so we now are back on an amendment. And I had on deck myself, Mr. Starr, and there was a point of information from Ms. Martin that I will answer no matter what. Mr. Starr, do you wish to remain on deck for the amendment?
I think I want to be off deck for right now. I want to see how this plays out first.
Okay, and I see Mr. Perry. The brief comment that I had wanted to make just had to do with the Dallas Accord. I do not, just as my personal opinion, believe that any of this would violate the Dallas Accord, to be honest with you. I believe that it follows the same thing that is currently in our platform that says, for as long as the government recognizes or licenses marriages, it can't discriminate, that sort of thing. I don't think there's anything in here that advocates for government or against government. The language to me just seems to be careful. I just wanted to throw that out there. And to answer Ms. Martin's point of information, if a primary is absent, the alternate acts as the primary and votes as the primary. If the primary is here and the alternate is here, the alternate can generally speak in debate unless there is an objection from the body, as Ms. Matson was able to speak earlier. I have Mr. Perry and then Mr. Cavoli. Mr. Perry?
Yeah, so I will actually speak against this proposed amendment. And if it's defeated, I would be making a motion to add the words "and the Electoral College" at the end, so that as long as territories exist as territories, they would be treated sort of like the District of Criminals, to where they would kind of have representation. They would get to vote for president, but they wouldn't be full states. Obviously, like I think that it should all go away, but like if it's going to exist, then either they're citizens or they're not, and if they are, they should be able to vote in all of the things. So vote this down so I can make another motion.
Okay, I have Mr. Cavoli and then Mr. Cholko to follow, and then Mr. Grindle.
Yes, I may well support this amendment, simply because of the complicated nature of taking that actual stance, as has been pointed out by several people. That the just mentioning representation in the U.S. House is likely insufficient, and likely to be more complicated than it's even worth in the first place. However, I would like to make one note to other comments that have been made with respect to the Dallas Accord. I would like to point out that the Dallas Accord most critically governs where we aim to finish, and certainly not where we start. If we cannot address institutions that presently exist, it makes any attempt to state platform positions feckless and foolhardy on our part. We certainly must be able to address existing institutions. What we advocate as the end state, that is somewhat more important, and I don't think there is a conflict here on those grounds. Depending on debate, may go either way, but right now I'm leaning in favor of the amendment. Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Cholko.
I took my hand down, so I'm out for a few.
Okay, Mr. Grindle.
I just want to reiterate that I think Darrell Perry had a really good point, that we should be trying to give these territories, if we're stuck in the situation where we have to say what should these territories be if we have them, I think his vision on that, of where they have electoral college votes as well, is a great one, and I definitely support striking down this motion so that he can introduce his motion. I think it's a good one.
Okay, is there any further debate on the McHose amendment? Mr. McGlenn?
Yes, just to respond again and I appreciate Mr. Perry's thoughts on that. I actually applaud that. I think that's fantastic. I just do not see that as a realistic objective that can be accomplished within our existing constitutional structure. I just don't see that coming to realization. Again, we can certainly aim for that, but I could not support the language with that particular statement in there, even with Mr. Curry's proposed rewrite of that. I think that this is cleaner. It just keeps us out of the weeds on some particular issues that would make it very difficult for candidates to speak on. I think it's just overly technical in that respect, and removing that sentence, I think, cleans it up and packages it well.
Okay, I don't see any other hands. Is there any further debate on this amendment? Okay, seeing none, I will restate what we are voting on, and that is to strike the last sentence, which is for as long as the United States maintains territories. We support a constitutional amendment granting their full representation in the U.S. House of Representatives and leaving the rest intact. Mr. Secretary, whenever you're ready for a roll call vote on the amendment.
Matt Choco.
I will abstain.
Laura Epke.
No.
That was a nay.
She said no, yes. Correct, she said no.
Richard Fast.
Pass.
Jeff Wood.
Aye.
Jim Cavoli.
Aye.
Paul Grindle.
Nay.
Duke Van Horn.
No.
Thomas Knapp.
Yes.
Kat Martin.
No.
Josh McHose.
No.
Randy McGlenn.
Aye.
Al Meckley.
Yes.
Bennett Morris.
No.
Darrell Perry.
No.
Omar Crow votes. I'm going to pass myself. Mr. Roots is not here. Mrs. Lewinsky is not here. Aaron Starr.
Pass for the moment.
Are you passing, Mr. Starr?
Yes, he passed.
Okay. Mr. Taylor is not here. Madam Chair, at the moment it's 5-7. Do you wish to vote?
I will never be voting unless it's to break or cause a tie.
Okay.
So we would deal with the 3 passes.
All right. So the first pass was Mr. Fast.
I will pass again.
And
Okay.
please double check Mr. Knapp's vote. He said that he's marked as yes, and he said no.
I have him as yes, but he said no.
That's what he is indicating.
Okay. Coming down back to me, I would vote no. And back to Mr. Starr.
I'll vote no.
Okay. And now back to Mr. Fast.
Abstain.
Okay. And so now I show 4-10-5.
Okay, so this,
Quick note, Mr.
yes,
Taylor is showing as an abstention. It is in fact a no vote. He's not present, correct?
excuse me?
No, he's right. Mr. Taylor, I had Taylor in the
Okay.
4-10-4.
Okay, so the amendment fails. We are back to the original proposal. And I had on deck from before, Mr. Starr, Mr. Perry, and now I will add Mr. Cholko. Mr. Starr.
Yeah, one of the things I don't like is I don't like the second sentence. Candidly, I don't know if I want these folks to be part of the state, one of the states. There's a lot of folks there that don't believe in liberty. There's a lot of handouts we give out there, and I don't want them I don't want to invite them for statehood. So, love to have them be independent and be done with it. I don't think the U.S. has any right to have territories. I think self-governing territories have a right to ask to be states, and the rest and the Congress could have the right to invite them. But I don't want to put out a blanket statement out there that these territories, which ought to be self-governing, should automatically become states just because they happen to vote and want to join the union. Thank you.
Mr. Perry, and then I have on deck Mr. Cholko and Mr. Grindle.
So I will make a motion to amend to add 4 words after representatives. Those words are "and the Electoral College."
Okay, so we are now on the amendment. I have Mr. Cholko and Mr. Grindle. Do you wish to speak on the amendment?
Cholko does not.
Okay, I'll leave you on deck for the main motion. Mr. Grindle?
I think that this amendment makes a lot of sense because if our goal is to give these territories the option to pick their own choice and to be treated as fairly as possible within our current broken system, there's no reason why they shouldn't have representation in the Electoral College.
Okay, Mr. Starr?
Yeah, I oppose this because then there's absolutely no distinction between a territory and a state. So it just doesn't make sense to me. Either you make them a state, in which case they would be part of the Electoral College, and they would have representation in the House of Representatives, and my assumption is the Senate as well, or you don't. So it's either do it in full or don't do it at all. So I'm opposed to adding these 4 words.
Okay, there's 2 hands, but those people have already spoken. Okay, Mr. Perry and Mr. Grindle, if you could lower your hand unless you wish to speak again.
Yeah, so to answer Mr. Starr's objection to adding the 4 words "and the Electoral College," I want to point out the District of Criminals has Electoral College votes. They have not full representation in the House, but they do have a non-voting representative. They're citizens. They pay taxes, but there's not any Senate representation. And I completely agree. I don't believe that territories should exist. But again, if people are U.S. citizens, then they should be able to fully participate in whatever electoral system the U.S. government has foisted upon them. I seem to recall that we learned about the American Revolution being fought over no taxation without representation, but that's exactly what the people in these territories have. And until just recently, the people of American Samoa were not even considered to be U.S. citizens. They were considered to be U.S. nationals, but there was a federal court judge that said that that was actually a fraudulent determination by Congress, and that the people born in American Samoa should be citizens. So yeah, let's vote for this thing, and hopefully, again, there will not be territories within several years, and we don't have to worry about this, and we can strike it from the platform when that happens.
Okay, I have Mr. Starr and then Mr. Knapp.
Well, the way you solve that is by not taxing the folks in the territories if you're concerned about taxation without representation. So far better to get rid of the taxation than to give them the representation. And I was never really a big fan of giving representation anyway to DC back when that amendment was passed. The better approach, and it's been done in the past, is in the past, Congress has actually given away part of DC to Maryland. And what it ought to do is it ought to give away the rest of DC to Maryland or nearby state. And just the only thing that should be in DC should be a couple buildings where a few employees work and where the representatives are, and that's it.
Mr. Knapp?
Yeah, regarding taxation without representation, I'm not sure what the status is of all territories, but I listened to Daryl Perry's old show, Free Talk Live, whose current one of their hosts have moved to the Mariana Islands, which are a U.S. territory. Residents of the Mariana Islands do not pay U.S. income tax. However, pursuant to the Constitution giving Congress power to dispose of and make all needful rules and regulations, Congress requires the Mariana Islands to have an identical income tax system to the United States. It's just collected there and kept there, and apparently they give generous refunds outside of the taxation itself. So it's not obvious either that taxation without representation is the problem, or that Mr. Starr is correct that if they have representation, they're no different than states. There are still differences in territories.
Okay, I'm gonna say first who I have on deck. I have Mr. Cavoli and Mr. Starr, but I would say that we're straying from the amendment, which is strictly about the Electoral College, and we're starting to get into the House of Representatives. I know they're so closely related that it's difficult, but I would ask that we stick to the amendment, which is currently being discussed. So, Mr. Cavoli?
Yeah, and actually on that note, thank you for making the point, Madam Chair. I was about to say to focus on that piece. Certainly, regardless of one's opinion of the various systems in place, the territories and their status therein, if we are going to take a position that we ought to encourage the existing wishes of those territories, those people, etc., and allow them to buy into the broken game that we have, it ought to be fully. There's not really any sense in letting someone step halfway in the door. Play the same game as the rest of us, frankly. I would speak that is in favor of the amendment and encourage us to curtail debate. I think we've heard a lot of the main points on these 4 words. And
Okay.
get back to the main motion.
Thank you. Is there any further debate on the Perry amendment? Mr. Starr?
Yeah, I just think it's the wrong direction. I don't want to increase the attractiveness of becoming a territory that's under the thumb of the United States government. I think that we should do the right thing and basically advocate for the independence of these territories.
Okay, is there any further debate on the Perry amendment? Mr. Secretary?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. I know that we should be speaking solely to the 4 words here. I'm looking at the 4 words and everything, and I'm having a hard time with it. So that's all I have to say.
Okay. Is there anyone else who would like to speak on the Perry amendment? Okay, here, seeing no further hands, Mr. Secretary, when you're ready for a roll call vote on the Perry amendment, which, to be clear, is to add "and the Electoral College" to the very end of this proposal, leaving everything else intact.
Okay, give me 1 second just to name it. Perry motion. Okay, Matt Choco.
I will abstain.
Laura Epke.
No.
Richard Fast.
Aye.
Jeff Wood.
Nay.
Is that an abstain?
I believe he said nay.
Okay.
Nay.
Jim Cavoli.
Pass.
Paul Grindle.
Aye.
Duke Van Horn.
No.
Thomas Knapp,
Yes.
Cat Martin,
Yes. Yes.
Josh McHose,
Abstain.
Randy McGlenn,
Nay.
Al Meckley,
No.
Bennett Morris,
No.
Daryl Perry,
Yes.
Omar Crow votes no. No. Ruth Slawinski, Aaron Starr,
No.
okay, Mr. Taylor's not here. We're going to go back to who skipped. That would be, I think, Mr. Cavoli.
Aye.
And did I miss anyone? Okay, I'm showing 6 to 8, Madam Chair. 2 express abstentions.
Okay, so that amendment fails. We are back to the original motion. And I had on deck to speak on the original motion, Mr. Cholko and Mr. Grindle. And now I will add, no, that's it. Okay, so Mr. Cholko.
Thank you. So, I've been abstaining on all these votes because, frankly, I don't see any way you get to a clear libertarian position here. Territories of the United States should not exist. Making them states or allowing them to vote to become states just further entwines these territories into the United States where they shouldn't exist at all. Giving them electoral college representation, same thing. House representation, same thing. On a personal level, I feel for the people in these territories that they're kind of getting screwed, but we don't unscrew them by further wrapping them up in the United States. And frankly, they should be able to vote on independence, but they should be given independence whether they vote for it or not. So I just don't see the clear libertarian position here and how you get this to represent one. So I'll be voting no on whatever, almost regardless of any amendments. I think I'll be voting no on this thing. Thank you.
Okay, I had Mr. Grindle and then Mr. McHose.
So I have to disagree with the previous speaker. I think that there is a clear libertarian position here, which is that these territories should be given the ability to choose how they associate with or without the United States, and that by supporting them having referendums on whether or not they will associate with the United States or be independent or state territories, we allow them to make that choice for themselves. Just as much as I think I think they should have the right to, leave the United States. They should have as much right to say, we've been under your thumb forever. We see ourselves as functionally part of this collection of states, and we wish to be formally recognized as such. I see no reason why it's un-libertarian to give them the ability to make that choice for themselves.
Okay, Mr. McHose.
I would just like to recommend that, remind everyone of the history of Alaska and its statehood, how when it became a state, majority of the citizens, mainly the native people, were not given a vote on statehood. So I just would like to remind everyone that this does hold some very hard feelings to some of us, and in some of these places, that do we really want to become a territory, or like what is the actual definition, the difference between being a territory, being a state? Because that was what it was, is that you have representation in the US House and in Congress, and being able to vote on matters relating to electoral college, and that is territory versus state. And that's all I have really to say.
Mr. Choco, did you intend to keep your hand up and be placed back in line?
No, I'm sorry.
Okay, Mr. Starr?
Yeah, I'll be voting no on this. I'd like to point out as well that, we have some territories that are formally recognized as territories, but there's a lot of areas around the world that, for all intents and purposes, they sure seem like de facto territories because of the amount of intervention that we have with our military and our policies overseas. So I don't know where you draw the line of this sort of thing, but clearly I just don't think this is the right direction. I don't think we should be expanding the size and scope of the U.S. by bringing these territories more and more under our wing. Once again, I think we need to be pushing for the only libertarian position, which is just simply give them independence and let them work it out themselves.
Mr. Cavoli?
I would like to point out one matter as far as the fact of the legal organization of the territories, which is that they are distinct from U.S. states and distinct from Native American tribes even, in that they are not recognized to have sovereignty. The government itself is not recognized to have sovereignty. Frankly, by extension, in some ways, the people themselves are not recognized to particularly have sovereignty, as opposed to the relationship a state has with the unit has some degree still, I think, under the Constitution of its own sovereignty and cedes some portions of that to the federal government. I believe in many ways, in at least opening the door for these territories to exit the organized government status, which is some sort of farcical and beyond the ones that we have established, is likely a step towards the right direction. It raises plenty of questions about secession and other things for other states, but to have that right within the legal framework is at least a potentially useful thing. And I again underscore the points that have been made, that to resist the choice, people, to deny the choice of those people, as it would relate to our government and their own decisions to how a relationship with these territories works, does not strike me as a particularly libertarian thing to do. These territories should be free to petition that, and frankly, given the way in which they have been handicapped as far as their government themselves, I agree that they should be free to walk away as well. But certainly forcing them to stay in limbo is even less libertarian.
Okay, one thing for Mr. Secretary, you had asked me to give you the Roberts reference for the earlier discussion, and it's page 500, lines 18 through 21. Okay, continuing on this motion, is there any further debate on this motion? Okay, seeing none, we are ready to proceed to a vote on the motion itself. To be clear, we are voting on the motion as originally proposed, since none of the amendments passed, and that is to add a new plank with title and position yet to be determined, which would read, "We support self-determination for the territories of the United States. The federal government should accept the results of a referendum of each territory regarding preferences for statehood, independence, or to maintain their current status. For as long as the United States maintains territories, we support a constitutional amendment granting their full representation in the U.S. House of Representatives." Mr. Secretary, whenever you're ready for a roll call.
All righty. Matt Choco,
Nay.
Laura Epke,
Yes.
Richard Fast, did we lose Mr. Fast? I'm going to skip him.
Hello, can you hear me? Hello?
Yes.
I will pass.
Okay. Jeff Wood,
Nay.
Jim Cavoli,
Aye.
Paul Grindle,
Aye.
Duke Van Horn,
Aye.
Thomas Knapp,
No.
Cat Martin,
Yes.
Josh McHose,
Aye.
Randy McGlynn,
Nay.
Al Meckley,
No.
Bennett Morris,
No.
Daryl Perry,
Pass.
Omar Crow votes nay. Roots, Lewinsky, Mr. Starr,
I vote no.
okay. Ms. Taylor's not here. All right, we have to go back to pass. Mr. Richard Fast.
Yes.
Okay, and now we have someone else pass. Daryl Perry,
Yes.
Madam Chair, 8-8.
Wonderful. I will vote yes. So that motion passes. So we are now on to item number 4, which is that the immediately passed plank shall be entitled blank. And what I am suggesting here is that we treat this as a filling of blanks. And if there are any suggestions for the title of this, we'll put them in order and we will vote on them. And the first one to get a majority will be the title, but at this time, it would be appropriate, so Mr. Perry did indicate he might wish to make a motion to instead move this to a different place. And I do think if Mr. Perry wishes to make that motion, he's entitled to do so at this time. Mr. Perry?
Yes, I would motion that we place this in plank 3.7, which is titled self-determination.
Okay, let me pull that up here for a second.
Say that again. 3.7, 3.17?
3.7.
Self-determination.
And where precisely in that plank?
At the end.
Okay, so let me...
So that it would be a second paragraph in that plank.
Okay, so let me read it so that... Oh, Mr. Starr, did you have a...
Yeah. I'll try. I guess I'm objecting to the voting method of fill in the blank, and the reason why is because the first, well, that's impacted by sort order. Whichever one has the first one to achieve majority gets adopted. If we do have more than one choice here, it should instead be done by approval voting, so that whichever proposal has the most support from this committee ought to be the one that is adopted.
If we, so I do have that noted. If the Perry motion does not pass, then I will address that. So what is going on with Mr. Perry's motion is 3.7 currently reads, whenever any form of government becomes destructive of individual liberty, it is the right of the people to alter or to abolish it, and to agree to such new governance as to them shall seem most likely to protect their liberty. And he would add the entirety of the new language that was just passed to this plank.
Point of order, Madam Chair.
Yes, Mr. Starr?
So you started off by saying that we're doing a fill in the blank. So this is just the first option of the fill in the blank. So it sounded like you were saying something different now. So
I may have, let me just clarify. I may have spoken sloppily. Earlier when Mr. Perry had brought this up, I had indicated that before we considered titles, it would be appropriate for him to make the motion instead to move it before we moved to suggesting titles. So I am not considering this as one of the blanks.
Okay.
Okay, so we are on debate of this potential move. I have Ms. Martin and Mr. Cholko.
So is it germane to make a motion to amend the title?
Not at this point.
Okay.
Okay. And Mr. Cholko and then Mr. Starr.
So I might need a little help here, but I would like to make whatever type of motion is necessary to kick this discussion about placing in another plank or naming to email. I think that's a better way to handle this.
This is Jeff Wood. I want to second Mr. Choko's motion.
So that would be a motion to postpone definitely to email. Email's not really dealt with in Roberts, but I think that is the clumsy way that it would be done. So on a motion.
Yeah, that's my motion.
Okay. 1 second here. Let me refresh my recollection. I believe that is debatable. So unless somebody feels differently, I believe that is debatable. So now we are on the motion to postpone to email ballot. And let me see who I have on deck here. Ms. Martin, did you intend to keep your hand up?
No, ma'am, sorry.
No problem. I have Mr. Starr, Mr. Knapp, and Mr. McGlynn.
So I think I'd rather keep debating it here while we're here, because we are all here. Also, I'm opposed to the idea of having a 2-paragraph plank. Every single one of our planks today is 1 paragraph. If you want to simply append the new language to the existing language, that would be less objectionable to me, but it's still really, really long. So either create a new plank altogether or figure out a way to append this or combine it with the existing plank, but I would be opposed to any proposals to make a 2-paragraph plank when every single one of our other planks are 1 paragraph.
Okay, and if the body would indulge me in making just a quick comment here, it seems to me that Mr. Starr is indicating that he might be considering an amendment to make it to append it rather than make it a separate paragraph. That's very awkward to handle in email. Mr. Knapp and then Mr. McGlynn.
My preference would be to handle Mr. Perry's motion in this meeting, and then if it fails, we can work on filling in the blanks and so on and so forth in email. I do agree with Mr. Starr that rather than adding a paragraph to the plank, we should just append this content to it.
Okay,
Madam Chair.
Who is speaking?
Richard Fath, I'd like to join the queue.
Okay, so I have Mr. McGlynn and then Mr. Fast and then Mr. Knapp. Unless you meant to, oh no, he put his hand down. So Mr. McGlynn and then Mr. Fast.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I oppose tabling this to email format as well. I think we can get through this rather rapidly. I also concur with the previous gentleman's remarks. I think that if anything, I would even support an amendment to Mr. Perry's motion to make this a subparagraph of 3.7 rather than adding it to that paragraph. Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Fast.
Yes, I was just going to say, based upon what Mr. Starr said, I will make the motion to append the new language as opposed to making it a separate paragraph.
That is not in order at this time since we are on the motion to postpone, which takes precedence. It would be in order if the motion to postpone fails.
Okay, I'll take it up at that time.
Okay. Is there any further debate on the motion to postpone?
Mrs. Elmore,
Yes, Mr. Secretary?
I will rise in favor of postponing to email. That's what we're doing. I mean, that's what we're currently discussing, right?
That's what we're currently debating, correct?
Yeah, I would rise to postpone the email. I feel like we could handle this through email. I'm actually a little confused, but I got the hang of what we're trying to do, and yeah, I think email would be best.
Is there anything I could say to clear up any confusion? I always distresses me to hear if someone's confused.
Well, we want to, so we've passed this wording, but we don't know where we want to put it. That's what we're doing, right?
Correct. And Mr. Perry has suggested adding a second paragraph with that language to 3.7. There's been some objections that it would be more appropriate to simply append it to keep it as one paragraph.
Okay. Well, I put 3.7 on the screen just to help everybody out.
Okay. Is there any further debate on the motion to postpone? Hearing none, Mr. Secretary, when you're ready for a roll call vote on the motion to postpone to email.
Okay. Make sure I'm on the last sheet here. Nope, one more. Nope, two more. Okay, motion. All right, Matt Choco.
Aye.
All right, Evke.
Can anyone hear me? This is Roger Roots.
Yes.
Okay, yeah, I've come in late, and I agree with postponing.
Okay, we're getting to the vote, so he will
Okay,
he will call upon you.
Yes, I was at Laura Epke.
Yes.
Okay, aye. Richard Fast.
No.
Jeff Wood.
Aye.
Jim Cavoli.
Aye.
Paul Grindle.
Abstain.
Duke Van Horn.
Aye.
Thomas Knapp.
No.
Cat Martin.
Abstain.
Josh McHose.
Aye.
Randy McGlenn.
Nay.
Al Meckley.
Yes.
Bennett Morse.
Aye.
Daryl Perry.
No.
Omar Crow votes aye. Roger Roots.
Yes.
Selinsky's still not here. Aaron Starr.
No.
And Mr. Taylor is not here. So I know someone passed. I believe someone passed.
Yeah, we did have one pass, didn't we? Sure. Ms. Martin. Ms. Martin abstained.
Yeah, she abstained.
No, there were no passes.
Okay, so if my numbers are correct, I show 10-5.
Okay, so after this meeting,
I believe it was 9-5. 952 is the tally that I took.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. I have 10. But in either event, it passes, and Mr. Secretary can review the recording. So after this meeting, a email ballot will be started with Mr. Perry's suggestion. Depending upon what happens with that, the other items will either be disposed of or become active again. So now, with 45 minutes left for the meeting, we are moving to item number 5.
Madam Chair, may I have a point of information, please?
Yes, Mr. McGlenn.
I would like some clarification regarding what you meant about email ballot. Does that mean that any motions to amend Mr. Perry's motion would be out of order because we would be in ballot?
Correct. If you wanted to amend Mr. Perry's, because this is such not a substantive thing, here is and y'all can tell me if you will object, I'm going to instruct Mr. Secretary to start 2 ballots. One with Mr. Perry's language that will make it 2 paragraphs, and one that will keep it as 1 paragraph. And I think that's the best way to handle, so we don't start getting into whether we're rehashing whether something's germane or not. I think that's the fairest way to handle. So unless there is going to be some appeal from that, that is what I am instructing the secretary to do after this meeting.
Madam Chair, I actually have an objection on that. I think that stops debate regarding how we can place that, and I believe that it would be in better order, in my opinion, to further consider Mr. Perry's motion, because there are members here who wish to amend Mr. Perry's motion. I think that would be able to handle this process in a method that would be agreeable with this committee.
That, I would say, has been foreclosed by the fact that it was postponed to email ballot. And that is the problem with email ballots, in my opinion. Mr. Olding, did you? Okay, so we're on discussing my instructions to the secretary. We have Mr. Perry, Mr. Starr, and Mr. Cavoli.
Madam Chair, I have a question about what happens if both of the email ballots that you just instructed the secretary to send out, what happens if they both pass?
A higher vote total.
I would say that the higher vote total would be the one, and the other one could easily be a minority report.
If they had the same vote total?
I would break the tie. If there's the same vote total, I will break a tie. Okay, Mr. Starr?
Yeah, I guess, is there a rule for that? Because I know that at least the way it works when you have 2 email ballots, whichever one passes last is the one that actually takes effect. So I guess you could offset the timing when you begin each one. But
I could do that.
Since they don't both go out simultaneously, and they can end early in theory if everyone votes on one. I just don't think you can do what you're proposing to do.
I understand. I do think it's the best way to handle. You can appeal if you like.
Can I suggest instead that if there's somebody on the prevailing side who wants to reconsider the last vote we had, that they consider doing that? So if anyone who voted yay is having second thoughts about that, if they ask for a reconsideration, maybe we can do that.
Can I just say I agree with Mr. Starr.
Okay, hold on. We're jumping line here. I had Mr. Cavoli and Mr. Olding. Mr. Roots, I will add you. Mr. Starr, I am willing to reconsider because I was doing this primarily as a courtesy to your amendment. If you are comfortable with just proceeding with Mr. Perry's proposal, and then we could reconsider to make it 1 paragraph, then I am more than willing to decide otherwise. I was trying to be as fair as possible to you.
I think that it's better to take it up now to decide which one we want to put out for a mail ballot, if that's what we're going to do. So I think that and I'm not on the prevailing side on this decision, so it would have to be somebody on the prevailing
I misunderstood what you had said. What you are asking is if somebody who moved to postpone, yes, is willing to make a motion to reconsider.
Right.
Madam Chair, I would like to move to reconsider the postponement.
That was Mr. McGlenn. let me hear from, I want to hear from Mr. Cavoli, Mr. Olding, Mr. Roots, and then I have you
Madam
on.
Chair, Mr. McGlynn is listed as having voted nay, so he was not on the prevailing side.
Okie dokie, so that will not be proper.
If we could,
Mr. Cavoli.
hey, so I was, and I have a question to the chair then, in the interest of clearing this up, and somewhat expeditiously, is the matter of considering the placement of this plank in a way its own business item that was motion passed and the original motion passed in the first place?
I do not understand your question.
My question is, if rather than, is there an, would there be a device by which, if reconsidering the motion to postpone definitely the particular placement, we would be able to postpone definitely the business item of deciding placement? Do you understand my distinction?
Right now, everything was, my understanding, well, the postpone was to email ballot, not to just postpone.
Yes, yes. Anyway, I think
it was to postpone the Perry motion to an email ballot. That was it. It wasn't.
Right. So
if it failed, the other items would remain on the agenda for a future meeting. The placement and title. If the Perry motion to add it to 3.7 fails, we are back to deciding where to put it and where to name it.
yes, and what I'm asking, because I believe it was the intent of the prevailing side, is there no device by which to move that entire business item of deciding the placement, that discussion, to email, or is that not necessary?
It would become in order if the Perry motion fails, and that could be done by email as well.
Okay, in that case, I will ask to reconsider the postponement definitely of the Perry motion to email ballot.
I believe it was Cholko's motion to email, but the motion, whoever did it.
Yeah, the motion to postpone that definitely to email reconsidered.
It already passed.
He can move to reconsider it.
A reconsideration requires a 2/3 approval, correct?
Correct. But first we have to vote whether we're going to reconsider. 1 second, I have to brush up on this a minute here.
Can I address one issue that
I
just
think
came
it's
up?
just majority.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Starr. And then, 1 second, who had asked for my attention?
Me.
Yes, Mr. Roots.
Just regarding the proposition that if two proposals both pass, I think the chair had said, well, the one that gets the most votes is the one that wins or prevails. I don't believe that's the law. I don't believe that's Robert's Rules of. I don't think that's correct. I believe.
Well, there's nothing about email ballots that's in Robert's Rules.
Okay, but if Congress passes two acts that are very similar, and one has a sentence and one doesn't, they're both valid law. If they both meet the threshold of the vote, they are both on the books. And if there is a conflict, the most recent one prevails.
We will deal with that after we deal with the motion to reconsider, because that is what is presently before us at this moment. So, one moment here. The motion to reconsider.
Tinted page 24, 25. Majority.
Majority. Is it debatable, Ms. Mattson? I believe it is.
If the motion being reconsidered is debatable.
Right, it's debatable. Okay.
Yep.
So we are now on the motion to reconsider, which is debatable. Would anyone like to speak on the motion to reconsider? We have Mr. McGlynn.
Madam Chair,
Yes.
could I be added to the queue?
Yes, that's Mr. Fast.
Yes.
And we have Mr. Secretary and Mr. Knapp. Mr. McGlynn.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I really strongly encourage us to pass reconsidering this. I believe that we can resolve these amendments quickly in this committee over this e-meeting. I think that allowing it to go to an email ballot immediately is a procedural mistake on our part, and will not really allow us to have a quality discussion about the placement of this and its final disposition. Folks, I think we could get through this real quick and easy, and I think we can find a great consensus on this. Let's just get this done tonight, if we could, please. And I encourage my fellow committee members their support.
Mr. Fast.
Madam Chairwoman, I'd like to be added to the queue. This is Jeff Wood.
Thank you, Mr. Wood. Mr. Fast?
Okay, we've got other things to do tonight. I would like to call the question.
Calling the question is not permitted in committees. Do you have something to add in debate?
No, let's just go to a vote as soon as possible in that case.
Mr. Secretary.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I was wondering about the LNC bylaws in regards to the higher vote total when it comes to minority reports, if we treat it that way, number one.
That
Okay.
is not relevant to the reconsideration.
Okay. As far as the reconsideration goes, I look at, I like clarity in things, and we had pretty good clarity for a moment when we did that vote. So I, at this moment, am opposed to reconsidering, and I kind of would like for us to get on with this meeting, because we were doing well, and now we kind of hit a bump in the road. Thank you.
Mr. Knapp. And I
As
see
you,
Mr. Oldham. Okay.
as you know, Madam Chair, I favor doing almost everything by email, except getting ourselves out of messes that we got into in e-meetings and can quickly get out of. I support the motion to reconsider.
Okay, and I had added myself after Mr. Knapp. I will only quickly say that I believe in fairness to let people make amendments. And several people wish to make an amendment, and I believe it's unfair to committee members to put this to email and foreclose their opportunity to do this. And I would ask the other committee members to show the same fairness they would wish to be shown to them. In my personal opinion, you may are free to disagree. Mr. Wood, and then Mr. Oldham.
I believe that the reason Mr. Choco made this, and certainly the reason I seconded the original motion, which passed 10-5, was so that we could spend the rest of this meeting taking care of other important business rather than spending the entire meeting on just this one simple issue. So I think that this motion to reconsider, if not in its intent, it is at least dilatory in its effect, and that we should not continue to take up this motion to reconsider. Thank you.
And
Decorum, Madam Chair.
I'm sorry? Mr. Starr?
Decorum, please. Decorum.
Yes. I don't find that well-founded, Mr. Wood. I do not believe it's dilatory. I think there's been plenty of good faith shown. Mr. Oldham.
So I think if you look back at the chat for the impetus of the motion to begin with, and the timing of it all, it was suggested by Mr. Choco at a time prior to Daryl making his motion, and the idea was that we would be discussing. Originally, the idea was going to be that we would be discussing the naming and the placement, sans Daryl's motion by email. I think most of the complication here comes from the fact that, Daryl got his motion in before what was being discussed in the chat was motioned. And I think it makes a ton of sense to, at the very least, have a vote up or down on putting it in 3.7 before we decide to whether or not you want to table the placement and the naming of that particular language that was just passed.
Thank you, Mr. Olding. I do think you're correct in your assessment, Mr. Knapp. Mr. Knapp, did you intend to keep your hand up?
Madam
Okay.
Chair?
Yes, who was Mr. Fast?
Yes, a point of clarification. A yes vote would mean to undo or to reconsider the motion to postpone to email. A no vote would be to uphold the decision to postpone. Is that correct?
Yes, a yes vote would be that we would return to vote again on the motion to postpone. A no vote would mean the motion to postpone stands. So to vote yes to reconsider does not automatically mean it's not going to be postponed. It means we're going to reconsider it.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, is there any further debate on the motion to reconsider? Seeing none, Mr. Secretary, a roll call vote on the motion to reconsider.
Okay. Matt Choco.
No.
Laura Epke.
Yes.
Richard Fast.
Yes.
Jeff Wood.
No.
Jim Cavoli.
Aye.
Paul Grindle.
Yes.
Duke Van Horn.
Yes.
Thomas Knapp.
Yes.
Cat Martin.
Yes.
Josh McHose.
Aye.
Randy McGlenn.
Aye.
Al Meckley.
Yes.
Bennett Morris.
No.
Dale Perry.
I vote no.
Omar Crow votes no. Roger Roots.
No.
Aaron Starr.
Yes.
And let's see. Did I skip anybody?
Mr. Van Horn, I believe.
I have Mr. Van Horn as an aye.
Oh, okay, sorry.
And I'm just double checking here that I have here on the call, 18 on the call. We will need 12 for 2/3.
No, it's a majority.
To reconsider?
Yes, it is. Ms. Matson confirmed.
Ah, okay, so then it's 11-6. No express abstentions.
Okay, so now we are revoting again on the motion to postpone. I would hope there's no further debate on that, though I have to offer it. Is there? Okay, Mr. Secretary, please move to a roll call vote on the motion to postpone to email vote Mr. Perry's motion.
Okay, Matt Choco.
So just to be clear, this is the same as my original motion to postpone. We're voting on it right now.
Yes.
I'll go ahead and vote nay so we can move on with it.
Laura Epke.
No.
Richard Fast.
No.
Jeff Wood.
Aye.
Jim Cavoli.
Nay.
Paul Grindle.
Pass. Come back.
Duke Van Horn.
Aye. Or I'm sorry, no. No.
Gotcha. Thomas Knapp.
No.
Cat Martin.
No.
Josh McHose.
No.
Randy McGlenn.
Nay.
Al Meckley.
No.
Bennett Morris.
Aye.
Dale Perry.
No.
Omar Crow votes aye to postpone. Roger Roots.
Yes.
That was yes.
Yes.
Brian Swinsky, no. Aaron Starr.
No.
And I show, okay, Paul Grindle.
Nay. Let's get this done with.
Okay.
Okay, so we will not be postponing. We are back to Mr. Perry's motion to add as a separate paragraph to 3.7. And I had on deck at that time Mr. Starr, who I believe wanted to offer an amendment. Please correct me if I am wrong there.
You are correct, Madam Chair. I'd like to amend it so the language is appended to the end of 3.7 so that we only have one paragraph.
Okay. Is there any debate on the motion? To be clear, no language is changing. It is simply to make it one paragraph instead of two paragraphs. I have Mr. McGlynn.
Madam Chair, for some of the arguments that I've heard regarding making changes to that existing paragraph and concerns over having a second paragraph, if it is in order, I would like to amend Mr. Starr's amendment to change that to making this language a subparagraph of 3.7.
I'm not sure what you mean by that. Could you?
Is it, maybe I'm using the wrong vernacular, based on, so 3.7 self-determination, make it like 3.7.1.
If you will allow me, I would suggest that you not do that, because nowhere else in our platform do we do that, and I think that would go down in flames, but you are entitled to make that, but I'm just trying to give you some friendly advice.
Okay, and forgive me, I don't have the existing platform in front of me. I should have had it pulled up already. Is there a 3.8? And I would just simply maybe change that to adding it after self-determination.
That would not be in order at this time.
Okay.
That would be in order if Mr. Perry's doesn't pass.
Very good. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Mr. Cavoli and Mr. Starr.
Let me clarify what I think would. I think this would read easier if we actually led with this part, perhaps. But in either case, the most expeditious thing would be to vote up Mr. Starr's amendment and work back from there. I think it is probably nicer syntactically to strike the new line, have this as one larger paragraph, and then we can quibble about the organization from there, as we are wont to do.
Okay, I see Mr. Starr removed his hand. Is there any further debate on the Starr amendment? Seeing none, Mr. Secretary, if you could prepare a roll call vote on the Starr amendment, which, to be clear, is to, instead of having two paragraphs, have it, the new language appended so that it is one paragraph in 3.7.
Okay, give me 1 second here. We're gonna call this the paragraph. Okay, I'll call this paragraph.
And I would like to add, it would, if this passes, I do think it would, never mind, I was gonna say something stupid. Go right ahead, keep me from saying something stupid.
I think you were treading the line of being out of order, huh?
I probably was.
Yeah. Alrighty, here we go. Matt Choco.
Pass.
Okay. Laura Ebke.
Yes.
Oops. Richard Fass.
Yes.
Jeff Wood.
Nay.
Jim Cavoli.
Aye.
Paul Grindle.
Aye.
Duke Van Horn.
Aye.
Thomas Knapp.
Aye.
Cat Martin.
Pass.
Josh McHose.
Aye.
Randy McGlenn.
Nay.
Al Meckley,
Yes.
Bennett Morris,
No.
Dale Perry,
I am pulling a Switzerland, and I will abstain.
Omar Curl will vote nay. Roger Roots,
Nay.
Aaron Starr,
Yes.
and okay, who do we pass now? Matt Choco.
Let's do yes.
And Cat Martin.
Nay.
Say that again, please.
No.
Okay. I don't believe I missed any votes. I have 10, 6, 1 express abstention, Madam Chair.
Okay, so that amendment passes. We're on the main motion, which is to add the language that did pass to self-determination, appending it to the end so that it is one paragraph. Now, is there any debate on this main motion? I see Mr. Olding and then Mr. Starr.
I'll ask a question.
I'm sorry?
I'll ask one question.
I can't hear you.
I have a point of debate.
Okay. You're allowed to debate at this time.
Why do we just say full representation in the U.S. House of Representatives and not the U.S. Senate?
Oh, okay. That would be out of order because that would have been a debate on the language we originally passed. This is now just placement.
Okay.
Mr. Starr.
Yeah, somebody mentioned, I don't remember who at this point, mentioned reversing the order, and I guess I'd want to hear the argument for that, because I don't have a strong feeling as to whether it should be appended to the end or the beginning. So I'm wondering if whoever brought that up could bring that up now and discuss that.
Who did bring that up to answer Mr. Starr's point of information? Mr. Cavoli?
Yeah, I suggested that, and I think with the combination to one paragraph now would be the germane time to have that discussion. I believe that since we do have the more general statement here, whenever any form of government, etc., and where it does speak specifically to the dissolution of any of those government, it might be most semantically useful at the end of regarding U.S. territories. As I mentioned before, they currently have an organized government. That form of government itself should also be dissolvable. Their whole relationship with the U.S. should be dissolvable. It is perhaps the most pro-Dallas Accord arrangement because it lets us speak first to the present where we are and finally to the most open end states where anyone could go, not strictly acknowledging any particular existence of government or lack thereof in that case. So I'm not prepared to move that at this time as an amendment, although I would suggest that if discussion would lead us towards that being a good idea, that someone ought. But in either case, I think the one paragraph combination we have now would work. It just might read a little more cleanly to people to change the order there.
That, I believe, would be in order for an email ballot if someone wished to do that at a later time. Mr. Starr.
Yeah, I guess so. Having heard that, I'm kind of I believe in making us making our point right up front for what we believe, and then later on adding more details as to what the benefits are or the consequences are of it. So I think I prefer appending it at the end as currently proposed, as opposed to putting it at the beginning and making somebody read through this whole thing before they finally get to the point of why we think this. Thank you.
Mr. Olding, there was a point in chat. Were you still trying to get my attention to speak on a different point?
I guess I didn't read the point in chat. What was the point in chat?
They were just reminding me you were trying to get my attention. I think we did address it, but I wanted to make sure I didn't miss a second attempt.
Oh, I didn't have a point in the chat, so
Okay.
I guess I was just wanted to argue against against the amendment of putting these things together. 3.7 is self-determination, and it's very clean, and the language that was just passed is, I don't believe at all, self-determination. I mean, there is some similarities, and the language itself does kind of fit together, but the title itself is very clean as it reads right now. It's one of our more succinct planks in the platform, and it already reads pretty perfectly, and so I really think it would do significantly better for us to just put this in a different spot and give it its own title.
Madam Chair.
Who is Mr. Fast? I will add you. Mr. Perry, then Mr. Starr, then Mr. Fast. Mr. Perry?
I had lowered my hand. I no longer wish to be recognized.
Mr. Starr?
I guess one thing we should be mindful of, if we are going to combine it here rather than making its own separate plank, and I was against this language to begin with, but I believe that the current language in 3.7 is pretty universally recognizable by people. So
I'll make a quick point.
Mr. Fast?
Okay, so I want to be clear on what a no vote would mean. Would a no vote mean that this would not be appended to 3.7 and rather it would still be able to be a separate plank or appended to a different plank? Is that the result of a no vote?
Correct. We've already voted that this is new language. All that's up in the air is where it goes and where it will be titled.
Okay, so a no vote would just mean not to add it to 3.7. That's all it would mean.
Correct.
So it would still need a home in that case, right?
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Starr?
I would suggest that rather than voting this down, if that would be your inclination because you want something different, that you instead propose an amendment for what you actually really do want. Otherwise, we're going to be sitting on our hands and wondering, what do we do next? So I encourage some people to put their thinking caps on right away and come up with a plank name and a location, if that's what their inclination is, rather than vote something down.
Okay, I have Mr. McGlynn and Mr. Cavoli.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Then if it is in order and listening to the argument that was just made, which I concur with, I would like to amend it to change it instead to add it as 3.8.
With what title?
If we want to take that as a separate motion, I don't know. I can certainly suggest one. That's up to you, Madam Chair.
I would, we had them earlier as separate items, so what I'm looking at here is you're moving to amend it to, instead of being appended to the end of 3.7, is to make it a new plank 3.8 title to be determined.
Yes, Madam Chair.
Okay. I believe that's in order. Now we are speaking on the amendment. Who would like? Mr. Starr?
Yeah, I would like to suggest that if you're going to add it as a separate plank, that you put it before self-determination, because candidly, 3.7 is the last plank in that section. And it's a very bold, all by itself exclamation point. So if you're going to add it, make a new 3.7 and come up with a title that makes sense, but don't make it 3.8.
Mr. Starr, are you, that is only a first level amendment where we're at now. Are you moving to amend to make it?
Yes. So
okay.
I would move to insert it between 3.6 and 3. That's currently 3. So make it a new 3.7 and renumber the existing 3.7 to 3.8.
Okay, so we are on the second level of amendment, which is instead to put it prior to 3.7 instead of after 3.7. Someone was trying to get my attention?
Madam Chair, I was going to try to accept that as a friendly amendment, if that's permissible.
No, once it's been given to the body, there is no such thing as a friendly amendment, though you can request the body allow you to withdraw your amendment. But it would be easier to just vote for Mr. Starr's.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Mr. Knapp.
I would have to rise in opposition to this. The language we just adopted is about self-determination. We have a plank called self-determination. That's where the language belongs.
Okay. Mr. McGlenn, do you still wish, or did you not remove your hand? Mr. Secretary?
Thank you, thank you, Madam Chair. So this is, Mr. Starr's motion is to insert it between 3.6 and 3.7, essentially becoming a new 3.7 and moving 3.7 self-determination to 3.8.
Correct. Correct.
Okay. I would rise in support of that. Thank you.
Okay, would anyone?
Point of information, Madam Chair.
Yes.
I just want to understand where we are exactly. So right now we're trying to decide whether to put between 3.6 and 3.7. If we vote for that amendment, it's still on the table at this point, whether we want to insert it here or append it to the end of 3.7, right? So that's still a question that still needs to be resolved.
Correct. Where we're at is there's two, the main motion was to append it to 3.7. We had one amendment to instead make it a new 3.8. We had the second level of amendment to instead make it a new 3.7 and move down 3.8 to 3.9. And that's
so does that mean the First Amendment would be that if we adopt it to make it a 3.6, then the next vote will be on whether to instead make it a pending onto 3.7. Is that right?
I didn't understand your question, so let me see what if your amendment is voted up, then we would be voting on it being a new 3.7. If your amendment is voted down, then we are talking about making it a new 3.8. If that is voted down, we are back to it as appended to 3.7.
Thank you.
We are 5 minutes away from the meeting ending time. We do have another meeting set, which will continue the business from this meeting. So we can decide to keep debating now, or we can move to vote on the pending motions. It's all up to whether anyone raises their hand at this point.
Madam Chair, point of information.
Yes.
So any unfinished business from tonight's meeting will carry over to the next meeting. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay, follow-up question is there a deadline by which new proposals must be submitted in order to make the next meeting?
The next meeting deadline has already passed, but I will set another e-meeting in which you can give other proposals. I am reserving e-meetings for things that have not been resolved by email.
Okay, thank you.
Because it's a 10-day window. You have to give 10-day notices, and our next meeting is less than 10 days away. Okay, I don't see any other hands, so we are moving to vote on the Starr amendment to take the new language and make it a new 3.7, which would automatically renumber anything following it. Mr. Secretary.
Make sure I have this right. Right ballot. So many ballots. No. Okay. Start watching. Okay. Matt Choco.
No.
Laura Epke.
No.
Richard Fass.
Yes.
Jeff Wood.
No.
Jim Cavoli.
Aye.
Paul Grindle.
Pass.
Duke Van Horn.
Pass.
Thomas Knapp.
No.
Cat Martin.
No.
Josh McHose.
Aye.
Randy McGlenn.
Aye.
Al Meckley.
Yes.
Bennett Morris.
Aye.
Dale Perry.
No.
Omar Crow votes aye. Roger Roots.
Yes.
Slawinski's not here. Aaron Starr.
Yes.
Okay. Mr. Taylor's not here. We're going to go back to the top now. We're at 9-6. Paul Grindle.
Aye.
Duke Van Horn.
Aye.
Okay. Did I miss anyone, Madam Chair?
I don't believe so.
11-6 with no express abstentions.
So Mr. Starr's amendment passes. So now we're on the main motion, which is to make it a new 3.7. That was the amendment we voted on. Now we're voting on to make it done. If
Madam
that
Chair?
yes, Mr. Starr.
Would it be appropriate this time to make an amendment to name it to the plank so it's territories?
I do not believe so. I think the naming will be separately. Okay. So, and I don't see any other hands raised.
Point of information.
Miss Martin.
Can you just restate the vote we're currently on, please?
Certainly. The language that we passed, the brand new language about territories, the motion we are voting on is to place it in the platform after 3.6 and before what is currently 3.7, so that 3.7 would be renumbered as 3.8 automatically.
Thank you.
Mr. Secretary.
All right. Matt Choco.
Pass.
Laura Epke.
Yes.
Richard Fass.
Yes.
Jeff Wood.
Nay.
Jim Cavoli.
Aye.
Paul Grindle.
Pass once again.
Duke Van Horn.
Aye.
Thomas Knapp.
Abstain.
Cat Martin.
No.
Josh McHose.
Aye.
Randy McGlenn.
Aye.
Al Meckley.
Yes.
Bennett Morris.
Aye.
Dale Perry.
No.
Omar Crow votes aye. Roger Roots.
Yes.
Ms. Zielinski. Aaron Starr.
Yes.
Okay, going back to the beginning. Mr. Choco.
I'll abstain.
Okay, and Paul Grindle.
Nay.
Okay, I don't think I missed anyone. I show 11-4 with 2 express abstentions, Madam Chair.
That is also what I showed, so that now passes. So we are going to be adjourned in one moment. I would just like to reiterate what will then be on the agenda for the next meeting will be to title, that will be the first item, to title this, though anyone could be feel free to start an email ballot on that if they wish. And
Madam Chair, I'd like to make a motion right now to take up the next order of business, which is I want to propose it be territories. And that way it'll be a pending item at the next item, next meeting.
I object. I motion to adjourn.
yeah, it is past 9 o'clock, Mr. Starr. So unfortunately, I do think that would be out of order. I was just letting everyone know where we were, but I did say we
Madam
were.
Chair?
The call for the orders of the day was after my motion was made.
I had already indicated, though, that I was adjourning the meeting and just giving a summary on where we were at. So I do think it's out of order.
Madam Chair?
Yes, Mr. Fast.
Would it be in order to extend time by 2 minutes?
No, it would not be. There wasn't notice that this meeting would go past 9. There's strict notice requirements for e-meetings. So where we're at is naming, unless someone does an email motion, and those omissions proposals for the next meeting. We are adjourned. We do have guests, I believe, still in the meeting. I would ask any committee members that can to hang around to see if any party members have any questions or comments. And if they don't, then, you know, of course you are free to leave, but anyone who can stay, I would appreciate it. Have a good night, and thank you, everyone.